right, welcome back to the Fighter Pilot Professor. I am your host, Meta. Glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about North Koreans fighting in the Ukraine and the Korean War history as it relates to that, kind of in some North Korean history. We'll also be talking a little bit about the idea of confidence versus cockiness and how to know the difference or how to act differently, I guess, between the two of those, right? We'll dive right in, and as always, hit the like button, follow me, drive me up on that on the algorithm so you can find me on Instagram and YouTube, Fighter Pilot Professor, and get this podcast wherever you can find your podcast. Welcome to the Fighter Pilot Professor podcast. I'm your host, Meta. And in the Fighter Pilot Professor podcast, every week we examine world events and your daily life through the mind of a fighter pilot. The episodes answer your questions harnessing my experience in 25 years of flying fighter jets and my PhD in history, policy, and strategy. You can tune in wherever you find your favorite podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and on YouTube, the Fighter Pilot Professor. So, recently reported, seems that North Korean soldiers are now fighting in Russia, in the area where the Ukrainians made a small advancement. So this is along the sort of central eastern border between Russia and Ukraine, near the Russian city of Kursk, which incidentally was one of the largest tank battles in history. And back a few months ago, the Ukrainians advanced several hundred miles into Russian territory, which was sort of an interesting development, I think. But nevertheless, currently it seems that there are North Korean troops now fighting on the side of the Russians in Ukraine, which is a whole interesting development in this conflict and for the Russian-Korean relationship and the Korean relationship with the world. The North Koreans have an interesting relationship, shall we say, with the world to begin with. And at the same time, or also kind of in the same time, here a few weeks ago, the North Koreans also tested their longest range intercontinental ballistic missile, which, as I understand it, was a successful test, which they haven't always been for the North Koreans. So it kind of brings the question of like, well, how did we get here? You know, who are the Koreans, North Koreans? What's up with North Korea? If you're not super aware. So the way we got two Koreas, or two nations within the Korean Peninsula, maybe is a better way to say that, is again, going back to World War II. Fortunately for everybody here, this is not a blame it on the British in World War I kind of thing. This is actually blame it on the Americans in World War II. So when the Japanese surrendered in August of 1945, the Soviet Red Army and the U.S. Army were occupying parts of the Korean Peninsula. And as part of an agreement between the two nations, they divided the occupational zones at the 38th parallel, which divides the Korean Peninsula roughly in half, North Korean, South Korean. And this led to the establishment of two Korean governments, the one in the south favorable to the United States, led by Syngman Rhee, and one in the north favorable to the communist Soviet Union, led by Kim Il-sung. And it's important to note that both Syngman Rhee and Kim Il-sung had, as it were, street cred with the Koreans, with the Korean people, because they fought against the Japanese imperial occupation during World War II. So that's kind of how they gained their cred. And obviously both of them had their sponsors, Syngman Rhee with the United States and Kim Il-sung with the Soviet Union. And so initially there were supposed to be elections to determine who was going to be the government of Korea. Neither side, neither Kim Il-sung nor Symanri wanted that to happen, and so this sort of steadily escalating level of violence broke out on both sides of the occupational line at the 38th parallel. So in the south, Symanri and his government were suppressing communists, and vice versa in the north, and both sides were conducting raids across the dividing line between North and South Korea. And then eventually in June of 1950, the North Koreans, with the support of the Chinese and the Soviets, launched an invasion, full-on armored infantry invasion of South Korea. This then prompted the United States and eventually the fledgling United Nations to jump in on behalf of South Korea and drove the North Korean army all the way back, almost into China, almost to the Yellow River, at which point the Chinese communists intervened, and then the battle drove back south of the 38th parallel, about halfway down the Korean peninsula, and then eventually the Chinese-Korean offensive was stopped by American intervention, and the Americans advanced again back to the 38th parallel, where the war stagnated. That initial up and back on the Korean peninsula basically took place in the first year of the war. So by roughly June of 1951, the war settled roughly along the 38th parallel again, where it stayed for the next 2 years as the two sides negotiated all manner of things like border control, what we were going to do with hostages, etc., etc., etc. Eventually, the war settled into an armistice, not a peace agreement, just a ceasefire, for lack of a better way to put it. And so there's no official peace treaty between the North and South Koreans, as most people already know. And so North Korea has been this independent communist state since then, right? And the Kim family, so Kim Il-sung, the first leader of communist North Korea, and then his son took over when he died in the 90s, Kim Jong-il, and then his son, Kim Jong-un, is the current leader of North Korea. And due to international sanctions and general bad behavior for the most part for the Koreans, they have been largely labeled a threat, a pariah state, however you want to call it, to most Western nations. The U.S., South Korea, Japan, particularly have a tense relationship, shall we say, with North Korea. And most recently, and frankly for the majority of their existence, North Korea, the Democratic Republic of Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the technical name of the government of North Korea, the Chinese have been the primary sponsor, with the Soviets and then now the Russians as kind of the backup sponsor of the North Koreans. North Korea, as most people know, is a very oppressive state, highly militarized, and their kind of number one pursuit to preserve the institution of the Kim family, which is realistically a dictatorship wrapped in the sort of auspices of communism, but realistically it's a familial line from the Kim family establishing a dictatorship. And one of their sort of mechanisms to preserve their independence or the safety of the regime, perhaps, is not just suppressing the Korean people, but also they've been pursuing nuclear weapons for the better part of their modern history, particularly in the 90s and in the 2000s, where the U.S. And other Western nations heavily sanctioned North Korea. And so My guess, and again, this is purely speculative on my part, my guess is that this agreement between the Russians and the North Korean government is largely a mechanism for the Koreans to get some sort of financial support, some sort of military support, some other technology, all of the above, and just general furthering security for the Kim family. That Vladimir Putin, the fact that Vladimir Putin, I should say, articulated this as a defense agreement between the two nations, which does exist technically, is interesting to me because in that parlance now it's a foregone conclusion, I guess, that the Koreans would help the Russians, but it doesn't seem to make any sense for the Koreans other than as a mechanism to help the Kim family stay in power, to help the North Korean economy, or to further some nuclear or other military project that the Koreans are pursuing. Which the fact that the Koreans tested a nuclear weapon, a ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear weapon during the same time, I think is very indicative of kind of the posture of the Koreans here, is that like as the Kim family and the North Korean government is wont to do, sort of as they've fallen out of the news, out of favor of being opposed in the West, they've typically done something to garner attention and sort of bring the spotlight back to them, and most of the time the efforts around that spotlight are a negotiating tactic to get some sort of favorable economic or other assistance. And my guess is that's why I guess that this is all happening sort of all in the same time frame, is that the Koreans are sending forces to aid the Russians, as it were, and also at the same time testing these ballistic missiles to sort of flex their muscles on the world stage and be like, hey, don't forget about us. We still exist out here as a problem for everybody. So that's my guess. We'll see what develops over the next few weeks and months. My guess is that that this will not go well for the Koreans, sort of in general, but it's hard to say exactly which direction it's going to travel. As always, you can follow me on YouTube and Instagram, The Fighter Pilot Professor. Keep hitting that like button, throw your comments down so you can push me up to the top and make it easier for you to find me when you come looking for me. And you can get the podcast wherever you find your podcasts. So, one of the things that fighter pilots are known for is cockiness, frankly, right? If you've seen the Top Gun movies, you have obviously seen that portrayed, and it is one of the favorite things for people in movies and in books, etc., to portray fighter pilots as being cocky, and frankly, sometimes we are. Another way to put that might be that we are confident. So, what's the difference between confidence and cockiness? I would lay it out like this. The difference between confidence and cockiness is confidence allows for the fact that you are or could be wrong in some way, or that the thing that you are proposing, the idea that you have, etc., is perhaps not the best idea or the only idea out there. And that's, in my opinion, the difference between confidence and cockiness. Cockiness says that I'm right all the time. There is no wrong me. The ideas that I have are the best. And frankly, nobody else can be quite as good as me at any of this stuff. On the other hand, confidence says, I think that I'm right. I have a lot of good reasons for being right. Here are my supporting elements of why I am right. And you are correct. I could be wrong. There might be better ideas out there, and here's the big difference, in my opinion. And I am open to the idea that I am wrong, and that there might be better ideas than mine out there, right? And so, it's a subtle difference, but the difference being is that you allow for the fact that you could be wrong and you're open to those ideas, right? In both cases, confidence and cockiness, right? The sort of element of sureness is definitely present, right? And in both cases, right, there is a belief that you are correct and that, or, that you can do the thing that you say you're going to do, which I think is important, right? I think that you have to go through life with some level of confidence, right? You have to be confident in your abilities, and we've talked about, like, how does confidence come with, how do you gain confidence in some things that you're unsure of, and well, as practice, etc., right? And so gaining confidence is not a bad thing, right? I want to be confident in my ability to do stuff and know that under pressure I can perform. And that's good, right? But that confidence also allows for the fact that I might make an error, that I might be wrong, that there may be a better idea out there, whatever that is, right? And so that allows me to be open to what that error might be. It might be open to those other ideas, etc., right? It helps me be on the lookout for what tragedy, as it were, what bad thing might happen in the act of me doing whatever it is that we're doing, right? Cockiness, on the other hand, sort of forgoes all of that to your own danger, as it were, right? If you forego all of the possibilities, right, and you just believe that no matter what, your skills are going to be able to get you through a situation, well, one of these days you're going to come across a situation that your skills cannot handle, whatever that is, right? Whether that's personal skills or flying skills or whatever, right? Driving skills, anything, right? And you're going to find yourself in a place that is bad, right? So, again, there's nothing wrong with being confident. In fact, I believe it to be one of the key elements to success, having confidence in your own ability and developing your ability to the point where you are confident in it. But in my opinion, there is never an excuse to be overly cocky and arrogant about your ability to do something, right? Keeping that humility and keeping the sort of page open to the fact that you could be wrong, that there might be better ideas out there, that there's another way to do something, right? That this thing might not work out as well as you think it is the difference between cockiness and confidence. All right, so keep shooting me your questions. Keep hitting the like button. You can keep following me on Instagram and YouTube, Fighter Pilot Professor. Keep finding these podcasts out there wherever you get your podcasts. Have a good one.